Where are you watching from? Drop your city and country in the comments below. We'd love to know. This story proves that even the strongest discipline can be shaken by the power of love and family. But what would you have done in Tom's place? Should he have followed his training, or did he make the right choice? Let us know your thoughts. And if you love powerful real-life moments like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Tomorrow at this same time, we're bringing you another incredible Royal Guard story you won't want to miss. See you then. The shocking moment at Buckingham Palace that left everyone in tears. The morning sun bathed Buckingham Palace in a golden glow, its rays reflecting off the polished buttons of Private Thomas Tom Reynolds' scarlet tunic. The 27-year-old British Royal Guard stood motionless at his post, his figure as rigid and imposing as the stone pillars behind him. His tall, bearskin hat added to his formidable presence, its weight pressing down on him after 6 hours of standing under the summer heat. The temperature had already climbed past 85 degrees Fahrenheit, the air thick with humidity. Beneath the shadow of his hat, beads of sweat threatened to roll down his face, but he remained completely still. Years of discipline had trained him to endure without flinching. He had stood through freezing winds, torrential rain, and even tourists who thought it was amusing to test the limits of his composure. Today was no different. A wave of visitors filled the plaza, their excited voices blending into a constant hum of different languages and accents. A group of American tourists, fresh off a cruise ship, pointed their cameras at Tom, snapping pictures as if he were part of the palace itself. "Look at him! He's like a statue!" a young boy shouted, tugging at his mother's sleeve. His wide eyes were filled with fascination as he marveled at the guard's unshakable discipline. To Tom's left, a group of teenagers laughed as they struck exaggerated poses, trying to capture the perfect selfie with the silent, stoic soldier. He had seen it all before, tourists making faces, telling jokes, trying to break his stance. None of it fazed him. His mind drifted for a moment. His sister was visiting from Manchester tonight, and they had made plans for dinner at their favorite pub in Kensington. It was a rare chance to relax, to step away from the rigid structure of his duty, to feel human again. But just as the thought crossed his mind, something shifted in the crowd. The usual lively energy dimmed, like a cloud passing over the sun. A strange, heavy presence pulled at the edges of Tom's awareness. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted an elderly man, slowly making his way through the throng of tourists. The man's movements were deliberate, his steps slightly unsteady as he leaned on a worn wooden cane. His navy blazer, decorated with military medals, caught the sunlight. Unlike the others, he wasn't here for sightseeing. Tom felt a flicker of something, a distant recognition he couldn't quite place. But his training demanded that he remain still. He pushed the thought aside. Then, as the veteran lowered himself onto a nearby bench, his shoulders began to shake. It took a moment for Tom to register what was happening. The man was crying. The veteran sat hunched on the bench, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped his wooden cane. His shoulders shook, and silent tears began to fall, darkening the fabric of his navy blazer, dripping onto the gleaming military medals pinned to his chest. The weight of whatever he carried was not just in his posture, it was in his very presence. Tom Reynolds kept his stance, his training demanding that he remain still, but something about the man pulled at him. It wasn't unusual for veterans to visit Buckingham Palace. Many came to pay their respects, to reflect on their years of service. But this was different. The usual tourist chatter around them began to fade as people noticed. A few onlookers exchanged glances, some whispering in concern, but no one approached. The sight of a man, a soldier no less, shedding tears in public had an unspoken gravity, one that even the tourists understood should not be disturbed. Still, Tom's instincts screamed at him. There was something about this man. He let his eyes subtly flick toward the veteran, staying within the limits of his disciplined posture. The medals on his chest weren't just any medals. They were specific, ones Tom had seen before, in old photographs buried in family albums. His breathing tightened. He took in more details. The way the man's jaw clenched as he fought his emotions, the scar just above his right eyebrow, The way he gripped the cane with slightly curled fingers, as if bracing himself against a weight only he could feel. Tom knew those features. His pulse pounded in his ears. His body screamed to move, to step forward, to get a better look. But his training, his discipline, held him in place. Then the man shifted slightly, reaching into his blazer pocket with slow, deliberate movements. His hand emerged, clutching a weathered leather wallet, its edges frayed from years of use. With careful fingers, he opened it and pulled out something small, something that made Tom's breath catch in his throat. A photograph. Even from where he stood, Tom could see the faded edges, the slight crease running through the middle. But it wasn't just any photograph. It was a picture of a young boy sitting on a man's shoulders, both of them grinning, pulling silly faces for the camera. Tom knew that picture. He knew it because he was that boy. Tom's heart pounded in his chest. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The photo in the elderly man's trembling hands was one he had not laid eyes on in years, but he knew it instantly. It was from a summer afternoon when he was just 7 years old, perched on his grandfather's shoulders at the London Zoo. His grandfather had always called him Little Hawk because of the way he used to sit by the window for hours watching the birds outside their countryside home. But that was impossible, because his grandfather had disappeared 20 years ago. A cold wave of disbelief rolled over him. He had spent years wondering what had happened, replaying the moment when his family got the phone call, his grandfather's car abandoned at a remote train station. No trace of him since. No goodbyes, no answers. Just gone. And yet, here he was, sitting only feet away. Tom's grip on his rifle tightened. He forced himself to remain still, to control the emotions threatening to spill over. This couldn't be real. His training told him to ignore it, to focus on his duty. But how could he? He tried to convince himself that it was just some strange coincidence. Maybe the man just looked like him. Maybe it was just some other child in the picture. But then the man lifted his head. Their eyes met. Tom felt the air rush from his lungs. He had spent his whole life looking at those same deep, piercing blue eyes. In photographs, in memories, in his own reflection, his entire body went rigid. It was him. It had to be him. And then, in a voice so faint it was nearly lost in the hum of the crowd, the old man spoke. Little Hawk. The name hit Tom like a hammer to the chest. The world around him blurred, faded, disappeared. The chattering tourists, the clicking cameras, the weight of his uniform, none of it mattered anymore. Because there, sitting just a few feet away, was a man who shouldn't be alive. A man he never thought he'd see again. Tom's entire world shattered in that moment. His mind screamed at him that this wasn't possible, that it couldn't be real. And yet it was. The elderly man, the man who had vanished 2 decades ago, had just called him by the name only one person ever had. Little Hawk. Tom felt his grip on his rifle tremble, his pulse roaring in his ears. His body was locked in place, trapped between the unbreakable discipline drilled into him and the raw, overwhelming emotion crashing over him. He wasn't just a royal guard standing at his post anymore. He was a grandson staring at a ghost. The crowd was unaware of the battle raging inside him. Tourists continued to chatter. Cameras still clicked, and the world carried on as if nothing had happened. But for Tom, time had slowed to a crawl. He could feel his chest tightening, his breathing growing uneven. Every fiber of his being told him to step forward, to reach out, to speak, to confirm the impossible. But his training, his duty, held him back. Royal guards do not break formation. Royal guards do not react. Royal guards do not move. His superiors had drilled it into him 1,000 times. No matter what happens, you remain still. But how could he? How could he stand there, lifeless, like a statue, while his grandfather, the man he had mourned, the man whose absence had shaped his entire life, sat right in front of him, looking at him like he had never left? Tom's fingers tightened around his rifle until his knuckles turned white. His feet felt like they were encased in concrete. His mind screamed at him to make a choice. And then he did. His right foot moved forward. It was small, barely a step, but it felt like breaking the laws of the universe. The reaction was instantaneous. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Phones shot up, cameras zoomed in, murmurs of shock spread like wildfire. A royal guard had just broken protocol. Tom barely noticed. His eyes were locked onto the man who had once carried him on his shoulders, who had told him bedtime stories, who had vanished without a trace. For the first time in his career, duty no longer mattered. Only one thing did: the truth. The silence that followed Tom's single step forward was deafening. The tourists who had been playfully chatting, snapping selfies, and moving about just moments ago were now frozen in place, their eyes locked on him. No one had ever seen a royal guard move like this. But Tom didn't care. His entire world had narrowed to the elderly man sitting before him, the man who had called him Little Hawk, the man whose disappearance had haunted him for 20 years. Tom saw it all in his grandfather's eyes: the sorrow, the regret, the years lost. And then he saw something else: pride. The old man's lip trembled as if he wanted to say something, but no words came. He simply sat there, gripping the photograph in one hand and his cane in the other, staring up at his grandson as if he, too, couldn't believe this moment was real. Tom felt his throat tighten. His chest ached with the weight of emotions he hadn't let himself feel in years. But he had to know. "Where have you been?" The words broke the last of the silence. A few gasps sounded from the crowd. Tom's voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it carried, as if the very air around them had been waiting for him to ask. His grandfather swallowed hard, his grip on the cane tightening. "They told me I had to disappear." His voice was rough, aged by time and hardship. "It was the only way to keep you safe." Tom's mind spun. What did that mean? Who had told him to disappear? Why now? His grandfather's hand as he reached into his blazer again, this time pulling out something else. A small wooden pendant. Tom's breath caught. It was a wooden eagle, hand-carved, rough around the edges, but he knew it instantly, because he had made it. When he was a child, he had spent an entire summer carving it in his grandfather's workshop. He had given it to him the day before he vanished. And now, here it was, proof. Tom's eyes burned, his grip on his rifle loosened, and then, before he could stop himself, he took another step forward. This time, it wasn't just a movement. It was a choice. What would you have done in Tom's place? Could you have stood still? Or would you have broken protocol for something bigger than duty? Let us know in the comments below. This story proves that sometimes rules and discipline must yield to something even more powerful: love, family, and the truth. Imagine standing face to face with someone you thought was gone forever. Would you believe your eyes, or would you question reality? Also, tell us, where are you watching from? We love seeing how far these stories travel, and we'd love to hear from you. If this moment moved you, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life stories like this. And turn on notifications, because tomorrow, at this exact time, we're dropping another Royal Guard story that will leave you speechless. Drop a comment, share your thoughts, and let's discuss the moments in life where duty and emotion collide. We can't wait to hear your perspective.